What family secret was finally spilled in your family? My parents got divorced when I was about 3 years old. I stayed in contact with my mother, but my father got full custody, as mom apparently relinquished custody because of her financial situation and claimed she made the difficult decision of giving custody to my dad for the sake of us kids, because he could provide a better life for us. The most difficult sacrifice she ever made. On several occasions my mother would also get drunk and lament her life and say something to the effect of, "I never should have left your father. He was a good guy, he didn't deserve that. We would have been happy." I had heard variations on it a bunch of times, so one day I decided to share it with my dad. I was in my mid-20s at that point. My dad, who at no point in my life ever discussed the divorce or my mom, replied. She said that, "Yeah, I left her because of her alcoholism and drug use and how she was always drunk during the pregnancy and while you were little. Kids deserve a safe home to grow up in." I later got that verified from my maternal grandmother. Apparently everyone knew but never bothered to tell me that my dad was the one who left mom because she was a druggie and an alcoholic, and she didn't have to make the difficult sacrifice of giving dad custody because he could provide a better life for us. The court straight up gave dad custody after a court battle where my mom was deemed unfit to be a parent because of said substance abuses. For about 20 years, I thought my dad got dumped by my mom, but turns out, he was just a really good parent and made the right choice for us kids. My great aunt was a nurse supervisor at a mental hospital in the 1920s. She fell in love with a guy who was being evaluated for a murder trial. She helped him escape and they went to Florida. But the police caught up with them. My aunt got off easy, but he got the electric chair. I found all this in a newspaper archives while working on family history. Showed it to my mom and she admitted it was all true. That my dad's little sister wasn't really his little sister. It was his sister's baby, raised by his mom. The girl didn't know until she was 21. In the 1970s a dead girl was found on my grandpa's property. Everyone including the local police just assumed she was in with a bad crowd and murdered by drug dealers. In the 90s, some of his grandkids came forward about all the molestation. After that, people started to realize grandpa probably killed that girl. My uncles are infamous criminals who killed multiple people. I thought they bred dogs. We found out after my grandfather died that none of his 7 children with my grandmother were his, and that they all likely had different fathers. My aunt didn't lose her teaching job due to budget cuts like she'd always claimed. Turns out she had never had a valid teaching license to begin with, regularly had affairs with the dads, and embezzled PTA money. Found out my grandma had a baby as a teenager and was forced to give him up for adoption by my great-grandparents. 40 years later he found us. My mother was Catholic. After 8 kids she would go visit family when she got pregnant. The Catholic Church would take the baby and rehome it with a barren Catholic family. I met a Greek Catholic brother. He looked like all of us but had a Greek name and Greek parents. Nanny I had when I was younger was actually my dad's attempted sister wife. She found out how batshit he was and dipped. My de facto uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born, with a few hiccups, has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first it was a bit scandalous, but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings' maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister, my cousin, has a daughter the same age and they're best friends, go to the same high school, totally inseparable, technically aunt and niece, haha. She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid, we're all stoked to have her in our family. My mother is kid number 7 of 10. My aunt, kid number 4, who was born in 1945, did her DNA and found out that she has a different father from everyone else. She was devastated. There was always rumor that there was an affair, but nobody talked about it. She has so many questions, but nobody's alive to answer her. My great-grandpa raped his daughter and his sons killed him. My mom was having an affair with a schizophrenic dude she met in a bar, got pregnant and just let her husband believe I was his my whole life. When she was sick in the hospital and looped out drugs, she started mumbling on about my dad not being my real dad. 23andMe test later and secrets out. My uncle was a cop. My father was a mid-level drug kingpin. He basically ran the marijuana and psychedelics trade in a small city. When I was a kid, my uncle died in the line of duty. There was a big funeral and everything. Turns out he wasn't killed in the line of duty. The cops found out that my father was paying him for cop information. When he was accused, my uncle ate a gun in his squad car in a parking lot. I found out 30 years later. My father's brother killed 4 girls when he was in high school. My father was the one who found out and told the police. At age 43 I learned I had a half-sister. My father had an affair and she was conceived after my brother was born, but before I was. She reached out to me, and is a lovely human. We have been in contact ever since, have traveled together, and I have visited her several times. I have half-brothers and sisters from the women my father raped. A survivor's daughter told me some, Ancestry and 23andMe did the rest. My mother did 23andMe and found that she matched with an unknown niece who looked exactly like her older brother. Her brother had an extramarital affair and had a baby without his knowledge. He passed away some 30 years ago when the baby was around 10. Grandpa was a pedo. Mom waited until Grandma was dead to share the news. I wasn't surprised as I always felt uncomfortable around him, and he was always a dick. My great-aunt was a prostitute. Her husband, my great-uncle, was a John. I guess this wasn't super shocking to the older generation or her siblings. But to my age group, we just knew her as a sweet old lady and my uncle as a gruff but kind-hearted old man, so that was sort of a strange thought. My great-grandma was a Russian mail-order bride during the Cold War. She got over, alone, on a boat. She left her Canadian buyer for a Ukrainian farmer and never told anyone she was Russian again. Communism LOL. Pretty sure she was a witch LOL. One of my adult cousins killed herself last year, and in her suicide note accused her father of molesting her since she was a child. And that's the start of the story. We found out Grandma's secret ingredient was actually just store-bought marinara sauce. Our family dinners will never be the same. My junkie uncle, revealed the sheer amount of crime that him and his junkie mates would commit to help my dad and his business. My dad had them steal from other competitors, stealing tools and wrecking their work sites. They would steal documents relating to competitors who were bidding for their same jobs. They would steal company cars and burn them so they could claim the insurance money. The funniest was that my dad threw a tantrum on site since they all called him the fat controller. My uncle said, "You pay me $50 a week and I'll fix that for you, since you want to be such a little bitch." My dear mom, ignorant as hell, thought my dad was putting extra effort in to get healthy. Turns out my uncle was just making custom capsule tablets with tiny amounts of meth on them, and my dad was losing weight faster than ever. It's a drop in the ocean compared to some other comments, but my dad always portrays himself as some holier-than-thou authority. He's such a closet crook. When my paternal grandfather died, the federal government reached out to do a state funeral. He'd been career Army and a colonel, so we didn't question it. Then the funeral came and they went all out. Huge procession, people showing up who are really big names, like heads of departments, senators, retired senators, people from the CIA and State Department. It was nuts and we were all super confused. Turns out he was a key dude in the OSI during World War II, and when the OSI splintered into the CIA and Secret Service, he went the Secret Service route. He wasn't on White House detail, but instead worked in a covered office that dealt with counterfeiting and currency. He went blind when I was a toddler and retired from the army. For whatever reason, he told no one about all his covered work with the OSI and Secret Service, and the only person who knew, my grandmother, was sworn to secrecy and never told anyone. My father grew up thinking he was just a colonel working on base. Only after his death were we given all sorts of cool shit like publications by him, lectures given by him, and all kinds of things from various things he did and was known for. All I knew him as was a blind old man who was perpetually smoking, drinking, and being a crotchety bastard. Turns out he was a bad motherfucker and all, but none of us knew. My great-great-grandfather was a huge financial success in the 1920s, owned a bunch of businesses, pillar of the community type, half the town worked for him. Built himself a huge mansion at the edge of town with all the modern conveniences. Lost everything in the stock market crash of the Great Depression, went out on his front porch, sat in a chair and blew his head off with a shotgun. Everybody was involved in covering it up, not just the family, but the local authorities and the newspapers too. His obituary even said that he had died of natural causes, though the whole town knew better. It was passed down as legend for generations that he had died young of natural causes, though no one ever mentioned why the family was suddenly poor. I found an entry in my great-grandmother's diary long after she had passed where she wrote about the whole episode. My two cousins, they were siblings, were having sex. I found one out myself. In my great-great-grandfather spent years in prison for violationing of the Comstock Act. Anthony Comstock himself testified in 1904 at the trial that it was the largest collection of pornography he had ever seen. LOL, damn grandpa. My grandmother called the cops on my grandpa for domestic violence. He was arrested. During his trial, he was sentenced to either jail or he could join the military. He joined the Navy and was stationed in New York. While in New York, he met another woman, got married to her, while still being married to my grandma, and had an entirely new family. After his discharge, he came back home and resumed life with my grandma, never to speak to the New York family again. And as an added twist, when he got back home, he was surprised to find he had a new 2-year-old daughter. This was a shock since he had been gone for around 5 years. As far as I know, my aunt's real father has remained a mystery. I don't know an exact timeline, but this was sometime in the 40s, or possibly early 50s. My mom was born in 56 and, by then, all the dust had settled. She didn't know any of the story until she was an adult. When my dad's mom was on her deathbed, she confessed that 4 of the 12 kids' bio dad was actually their uncle. We did an ancestry DNA test, and found out my dad has a half-sister. Turns out grandpa had been seeing her mother on the side for probably more than a decade, and also had at least one other long-term affair. About a month ago, my mother-in-law's 88-year-old sister revealed on her deathbed that her husband's best friend was actually the father of all 4 of her children. Her husband was an abusive grade-A jerk by all accounts. While everyone was shocked, no one was saddened by this news. The story was always that my 2 cousins were adopted and not related to each other even. People sometimes would ask them if they were twins. They would say nope, we're adopted. Somehow it got out that their bio mom was their younger aunt. The older sister adopted and raised both girls as her own. Younger aunt/mom got married and started a family before all this came out too. It was a wild journey. I have heard this is common in Catholic families. They hide the illegitimate pregnancy and someone in the family adopts the child or pretends it is an older married family member's child. This was in the early 80s, so I guess it was possible to get away with it. My great-great-grandfather was killed by my great-great-grandmother because she was having an affair with the sheriff, and my grandfather said he was going to kill the sheriff. My grandmother shot him in the street and everyone assumed it was the sheriff. There was no proof and no witnesses, so no one was ever charged with his murder. My grandmother told my great aunt on her deathbed. Also after all of her children had passed away. She said she still loved the sheriff. And would have done it again. Side note. The sheriff died from a fall the next summer, so after all that happened, my grandmother, she spent the rest of her life unmarried. She was 102 when she died. My great-grandma was 3 years older than my great-grandpa and lied about her age in order to be married. He was underage and they had my grandma while still underage. She was a hoot, apparently. Edit, forgot to add that my grandma was born in 1937. This would have been a huge scandal back then. My sister and I found out in our mid/late 20s that we had a full-on brother. Our dad got our mom pregnant in high school, and cause it was the 60s, it was all hush-hush, and she went to do her senior year with family and just quietly came back to town. They ended up getting together for real in college and no one knew, not their lifelong friends or even my uncle. Our brother had a good childhood with his adoptive family, but he was always curious about his birth mother, so he wrote her a letter. He sure was surprised to also come to meet his dad and 2 sisters. Crazy thing is, he didn't live too far away and we all look extremely alike. Would have been weird if we'd have bumped into each other otherwise. My mom might not actually be my biological mother. I'm a surrogate baby and was told my entire life, even though my mom didn't birth me, I am 100% biologically my parents' kid. Well, I've been wanting to get one of those 23andMe things done cause I thought learning more about my family could be cool, but my mom was super against it. She kept referencing the Golden State Killer as her argument for the government using my DNA against me or someone else in the family, and I was like, Mom, they caught a serial killer, I'm pretty sure that's a good thing. Also, she's not a conspiracy nut in any other way than specifically this, so I thought her reaction was very odd. Anyways, I was out grabbing a drink with my dad a few weeks ago and I was like, hey BTW, why is mom so weird about me getting a 23andMe test? And he explained that actually donor eggs were in the mix because my mom's eggs weren't taking, so there's about a 50/50th chance I am not in fact biologically related to my mom, and my mom's a bit freaked about me finding out. I don't actually care, my mom is my mom 100%, I'm just curious about my genealogy. I also want to have kids eventually and would very much like to know if there's anything I should be looking out for. Not a super dramatic thing, I mean I guess it is to my mom but not to me. I'm not traumatized by this, and actually it kinda makes sense cause I look exactly like my dad, but the few features that aren't my dad's aren't my mom's either. I don't look like her side of the family at all. The only thing my mom and I have in common is that we're both blonde, but my dad is also blonde. So we found out after my grandpa died that he had another kid with a woman he met before my grandma. I don't know if he ever knew he had a kid. The offspring showed up on one of those ancestry gene websites and said he was open to meeting family, so some of the older cousins went out hunting with him. All this was spilled to me at my cousin's wedding 2 years ago, and I guess people in the family had known for a few years. My parents never told me and they still don't know that I know. Just found out my missing paternal grandfather was murdered back in the 80s. He was a scumbag, but I'd occasionally try to find out about him because I knew my dad needed closure. He'd been chased out of town by the mafia for running some fraud scheme. I thought it might have to do with that, but it turns out he just pissed off some guy at a bar and took one too many bricks to the head. FYI. It did not give my dad closure. He just graduated to feeling family shame. We're working on it.